You have to start Good morning and welcome to Orange County's World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event for 2022. My name is Carol Dupay and I work at Providence St. Jude Medical Center. The World Elder Abuse event, let me start again. The World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event was first launched on June 15th by the World Health Organization at the United Nations to promote a better understanding of elder abuse and to shine the light on the need to recognize and defeat elder abuse in all its forms, physical, emotional, sexual, and financial around the world. WEAAD events have been happening in Orange County, California for roughly a dozen years now. And my dog has not been barking all morning, except right this second, of course. The first one in 2010 was very small, and it began at the University of California, Irvine, and was championed by Dr. Carrie Burnite, a visionary professor of gerontology at UCI. Over the years, those involved in the event have come from many diverse agencies, organizations, and institutions from around the county, and all have worked to prevent elder abuse and mistreatment. In 2011, President Barack Obama issued the first official presidential proclamation naming June 15th National Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Not long after that, the governor of the state of California and the Orange County Board of Supervisors followed suit and likewise recognized and officially proclaimed June 15th Elder Abuse Awareness Day. The FBI has a dedicated department identifying and bringing to justice elder abuse offenders. Many California County District of Attorney offices have departments and staff who are committed and focused on prosecuting elder abuse, fraud, scams, and other forms of elder mistreatment. In 2015, the University of Southern California Keck Institute became the new permanent home of the National Center on Elder Abuse. Attendance at the WEAAD conferences here in Orange County has topped 400 over the years. And there have been many years when the county hosted 2 such conferences in the same weekend in both South and North Orange County. Now, there are 20 to 40 WEAAD events that happen annually across the United States and Canada, and include events from numerous other countries as well. Themes of the conferences have ranged from caregiver overwhelm to protecting against cyber elder abuse to empowering older adults to stop elder mistreatment. And we've had numerous nationally acclaimed speakers, judges, authors, local mayors, police officers, actual cape-wearing elder abuse superheroes, and even flash mob dancers. Our hope is for professionals and the community at large to become more aware of elder mistreatment in all of its forms, and to continue to empower older adults and the people who love and care for them to prevent, identify, report, and act against those who perpetuate mistreatment. We are so glad you have joined with us today. Welcome to the 2022 World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event.
Thank you so much, Carol. My name is Maika Bledsoe, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Now for some housekeeping. Today's event is being recorded and will be available to all attendees in case you would like to go back and reference any of our slides, resources, or other materials. You have all been muted by our webinar administrator so we can avoid any unnecessary background noise. Your audio, how loud we sound to you, is controlled by you though. You can adjust your volume on whatever device you are watching us on. The hand raising feature has been disabled as well, which leads me to our next agenda item, which is how to ask questions. What you are seeing now is a screenshot of the Q&A box, known as the question and answer box. During the presentation, you will be able to jot down any questions you have in this area. We have committee members reviewing these throughout the presentation and will ask questions of our speaker at the end of their presentation. Your question also might be responded to with some helpful information and links. Please remember not to wait until the end of the presentation to ask your question, as we will be gathering these questions for the speakers throughout their presentation. Now you see the overview of our webinar today. You will hear from two guest speakers, Dr. Michelle Park and Daniel York, who will be speaking on our theme of resiliency and aging. Once each presenter has spoken and the Q&A portion has concluded, we will move to our closing remarks. Our planning committee has been working for the past 7 months on our annual World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event. And while we are disappointed that we are not meeting you in person, we are grateful to be able to have this platform via Zoom for this event today. This slide captures all of our WEAAD committee. Thank you to this wonderful committee for the time and energy you all put into this event. Next, we would like to do several poll questions to share some interesting facts about older adults. Now you should see the first poll question. Please go in and select your answer. I see people are still answering. Thank you all very much. Okay. All right. I will end the poll now. Thank you all very much for answering this question. And I will share the results with all of you. And the results show an overwhelming 54.1 million as an answer to the question. And I want to tell you all, you are correct. Also, it is interesting to note that the older adult population represents 16% of the total population. Thank you all for that. Now time for our next poll question. The question is, what percentage of the 54.1 million older adults aged 65 and older live alone? Please make your selections. Wonderful. Thank you. All right, you're all much quicker this time. I'm in the poll now. Oh, still answering. All right, wonderful. I'm in the poll. And I'll share the results. Okay, and it looks like you overwhelmingly chose that the answer is 28%. And again, you were all right. Wonderful job. Also important to note here that that 21% of older men live alone and 34% of older women live alone. And then among women who are over age 75, 44% live alone. So we'll move on to our last poll question. And you'll see the last question. How many older adults 65 or older are in the workforce? I'm going to let. Looks like we're almost done. Thank you, everyone. All right. I think we've got everyone. I will end the poll here and share the results with you all. Okay, looks like the answer squeaking by on this poll is 7.6 million. I will have to say the answer is actually 10.6 million. You were all so close, so close. Surprisingly, 10.6 million older adults are in the workforce, and 26.6% of those ages 65 to 74 are working, and Out of those who are over the age of 75, 8% are working. So thank you all so much for your participation in these polls. Next, I would like to introduce Libby Anderson from Council on Aging, who is going to introduce our first guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Maika. And we are very fortunate to have a well-known expert in the field with us today. Dr. Michelle Park is the program psychiatrist for the Reconnect Early Intervention Services for Older Adults program of the Council on Aging, Southern California. A graduate of Stanford University and Loma Linda University School of Medicine, she completed her combined residency in family medicine and psychiatry at the University of California at Davis Medical Center. Her professional interests include integration of mental health in emerging adulthood and older adults. Dr. Park, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Libby. Hello, everyone. Good morning. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today on World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. If I could get my slides started. All right, and next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so today I'll be discussing elder abuse as a public health issue. Sorry about that. Can you hear me all? Sorry, just one second.
Hi, Dr. Park. We are unable to hear you. No.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I apologize for the technical difficulties. Oh. Hello, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. I apologize. All right, so as I was saying, I'll be discussing how resilience is related to preventing and overcoming the harms of elder abuse, both on an individual and societal level. And finally, I'll be discussing the impacts on ageism on elder abuse and resilience. If I could get the next slide, please. So before I jump into it, I'd like to take advantage of this cool audience poll system and ask 4 questions that were part of the National Poll on Aging. And I'll be discussing their findings later in my presentation and comparing it to what we find on our polls today from our audience. And disclaimer, obviously our audience is not necessarily a representative sample and not comparable to the national poll, but this is just for fun. So if I could get the poll up, please. The first question is whether, how often essentially you see, hear, or read jokes about old age, aging, or older people. The second question is whether you hear, see, and or read things suggesting that older adults and aging are unattractive or undesirable. The third question is whether you disagree or agree or strongly agree with the fact that, or the statement that feeling lonely is part of getting older. And the fourth question is whether you disagree or agree with the statement that feeling depressed, sad, or worried is part of getting older. I'll just give a minute for that. And Mike, if you could advance as soon as folks have finished answering.
Yes, I will. Looks like people are still answering. All right, we'll give it another
Great.
quick minute, and I think we are almost there. All right, there it is. I will stop the poll.
Great. And next, I'd actually like to share a 3.5-minute video that's going to frame how we should and will be talking about elder abuse during my presentation today. And this video was made before COVID, but I'll come back to reference the many parallels that I see in terms of how we should respond to elder abuse as a public health issue in the same way that we would address a pandemic. If you could press play, please.
A just society works to make sure everyone is free from the threat of abuse at every stage of life. To live up to our ideal of justice for all, we need to work to address the social issue of elder abuse. It's important to understand what creates the risk of experiencing abuse or neglect as we age. A strong and just society is like a structure, supported by many beams. We need strong beams that are frequently maintained. You can think of these beams as the policies and programs that reinforce the relationships and resources needed for health, happiness, and safety. When those support beams are missing or not maintained, the structure is weaker and may not meet our expectations that people are able to live free from maltreatment. The first and most important step to prevent elder abuse is to reduce social isolation. George, age 77, reminds us why this is important. George spends most of his time at home alone since his wife died. His daughter lives too far away to visit regularly, and his neighborhood lacks reliable public transit and many age-friendly civic spaces. Fewer social interactions mean fewer opportunities for walking, talking, and laughing. And with these normal, healthy experiences missing, George's physical, cognitive, and emotional health have gotten worse. His daughter does not know what she can do or where she can turn for help. Without the structure of support, it's easy to see how if George encountered an unsafe situation, the problem might go unnoticed. George's story of social isolation is not uncommon. With millions of our fellow Americans living in similar situations, it's fair to say that our nation's social structure needs repair. Just as one beam alone can't support a building, individuals and family members alone can't single-handedly manage the problem of social isolation and the corresponding risk of maltreatment. The good news is that there are many ways to strengthen our social supports through policies, services, and programs that keep us integrated in our communities as we age. We can design and equip community centers to work as intergenerational spaces that allow older people to build relationships and participate in the work, play, and life of our neighborhoods. We can think about the role of transportation and reducing social isolation and adjust systems so that we can all continue to move throughout our communities as we age. We can figure out new and better ways to arrange and coordinate the teams, agencies, and programs that specifically work with older people. We can develop programs to educate families and professionals who work with older adults to understand the importance of preventing isolation, how to spot the warning signs of maltreatment, and what to do to address abuse or neglect. By doing all we can to strengthen the social support structure, we can reduce social isolation, protect communities and families against elder abuse, and build a nation that lives up to our promise of justice for all. Learn more and see how you can get involved in preventing elder abuse and promoting greater justice for older people at ncea.acl.gov.
All right, thank you. Micah, if you could get the next slide. So as the National Center on Elder Abuse puts it, in a society that values the just treatment of all people, elder abuse has implications for all of us. And so it's important to find the right solutions to it. Elder abuse is the mistreatment or harming of an older person. It can include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, along with neglect and financial exploitation. And many social factors, for example, a lack of support services and community resources, can make conditions ripe for elder abuse. We need social supports and reinforcements to ensure that we can all participate in society and live free of neglect and abuse as we age. So my approach today when talking about older adult resilience, elder abuse, and ageism is to keep in mind this broader societal perspective while also providing information that we can use on an individual, relationship, community, and societal level. So in other words, I'd like for us to keep the social ecological model in mind, which is the graphic that you see here on the bottom. This is the framework that the CDC uses to study violence prevention, which is applicable to elder abuse as well as many other public health challenges. Next slide, please. So I want to go briefly into further detail about the 5 forms of elder mistreatment: physical abuse, psychological or emotional abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and neglect. Understanding what constitutes elder abuse is often impacted and informed by social cultural orientations and may be differently construed by different communities and individuals. And in fact, the lack of a shared definition of elder abuse is one of the many barriers to researching this complex issue. So that being said, I'd like to provide an overview of what each of the forms of elder abuse may entail according to the CDC and the National Center on Elder Abuse. So physical abuse is the intentional or reckless use of physical force or physical coercion that may result in bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. Physical abuse also includes any unlawful, excessive, or unnecessary use of physical or chemical means to restrain or confine an elder, such as force feeding and physical punishment. Emotional or psychological abuse is the infliction of anguish, pain, or distress through verbal or nonverbal acts, including but not limited to verbal assaults, insults, threats, intimidation, humiliation, coercion, isolation, and harassment. Financial abuse is the illegal or improper use of an elder's funds, property, or assets, including but not limited to misusing or stealing an older person's money or possessions, coercing or deceiving an older person into signing any document, for example, contracts or wills, and the improper use of conservatorship, guardianship, or power of attorney. Sexual abuse is non-consensual sexual contact of any kind with an older adult perpetrated through force, threats, or the exploitation of authority. Sexual abuse includes, but is not limited to, unwanted touching, sexual assault or battery, sexual harassment, and sexual interaction with elders who lack the capacity to give consent. And finally, neglect is the refusal or failure to fulfill any part of a person's obligations or duties of care to an elder, which include, but are not limited to, life necessities such as food, water, shelter, clothing, personal hygiene, medicine, comfort, and personal safety. Next slide, please. So several factors make elder abuse a public health issue that needs greater awareness and interventions at this time. So first, the growth rate of the older adult population, persons 65 and older, has greatly exceeded the growth rate of the population of the country as a whole. We have an increasing number and proportion of older adults in our population that are potentially at risk for abuse. As you can see on the chart on the left, what used to look like a pyramid in 1960 will look more like a pillar in 2060, with broad implications for our society. And on the chart on the right, you can see that older adults are projected to outnumber children by 2035 for the first time in US history. Second, the public health impacts of elder abuse may be far-reaching due to the numerous and varied physical and psychosocial consequences of being exposed to these phenomena, in addition to the financial implications in terms of annual health expenditures, the cost of financial abuse, and other societal costs. Elder abuse is predictive of later disability among persons who initially displayed no disability and is associated with increased rates of ER utilization, increased risk of hospitalization, and increased risk for mortality, among other consequences. Next slide, please. So elder abuse is a serious human rights violation that requires urgent action. However, major gaps remain in estimating the prevalence of elder abuse, partially because of the lack of consensus in defining, as I mentioned previously, and measuring elder abuse and its major subtypes, with really wide variations in reported prevalence rates throughout the world. For example, national estimates of past year abuse prevalence rates range from 2.6% in the UK and 4% in Canada to 18.4% in Israel and 29.3% in Spain. Here in the US, the most commonly cited study estimates that 1 in 10 older adults who live at home have experienced elder abuse in the past year, while per the WHO, a global estimate is more like 1 in 6. And unfortunately, elder abuse is also greatly underreported, with an estimated 23 out of 24 cases going unreported. Prevalence estimates for the specific types of abuse vary as well, but a study from the Department of Justice in 2009 found that financial abuse was the most commonly reported, followed closely by neglect and psychological abuse, then much lower prevalences of physical mistreatment and sexual mistreatment. Here in Orange County, the reports of the types of elder abuse seem to track. The number of reports sent to Adult Protective Services is increasing from 2014 until last year, with financial abuse consistently accounting for approximately 30% of the reports as the most commonly reported form of elder abuse. Next slide, please. Now, as I was doing my research for this presentation, I wanted to get a sense of context for how common elder abuse might be in comparison to other forms of abuse and violence, because I hadn't heard it presented quite in that context. So according to the CDC, unfortunately, what I found is that abuse and violence is common in many other contexts and across the board. And the consensus is that these numbers are not capturing the full extent of the problem because of underreporting. So just as an example, intimate partner violence is common. Data from the CDC indicates that about 1 in 4 women and nearly 1 in 10 men have experienced contact sexual violence, physical violence, and or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime and reported some form of intimate partner violence related impact. Child abuse and neglect, unfortunately, are common. At least 1 in 7 children have experienced child abuse and neglect in the past year in the US, and this is also likely an underestimate because many cases are unreported. Sexual violence is common. More than 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced sexual violence involving physical contact during their lifetimes. Now, again, this is compared to the estimate of 1 in 10 older adults who have experienced elder abuse this past year. And I mentioned these other forms of abuse and violence not to minimize the importance, of course, of focusing on and increasing awareness of elder abuse, but to once again reiterate that these are all public health issues related to one of these countries' founding principles, which is justice for all. We can create a more just society for all people, regardless of age, with policies and programs that help us stay healthy, connected to our families, friends, and loved ones, and enable us to participate in our communities at all points in our lives. Many of the policies that decrease the risk of elder abuse, I believe, would also serve to decrease the risk of other forms of abuse and violence as well, because working towards a more just society for all means that everyone could potentially benefit. And I also wanted to highlight here that older adults are not a homogeneously and especially vulnerable group when looking at the context of the broader societal problem of abuse and violence. Next slide, please. Now, speaking of context, I want apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so sorry about this. I was highlighting the facts about COVID. So the experience of older adults during this pandemic, just wanted to bring up a few facts given that we're in our 3rd year and 5th wave of living through COVID. So older adults have accounted for a disproportionate number of deaths due to COVID, with 71% of all deaths in California in older adults over 65, despite only being 15.7% of the population, or 16%, as Maika mentioned. Nursing homes have accounted for 2% of the state's cases of COVID, but 13% of its deaths. Next slide, please. And there was a lot of concern earlier on and throughout the pandemic that because older adults have borne the brunt of the mortality risk of COVID, and because the pandemic exacerbated pre-existing health disparities and created greater social isolation, that there would be a very high toll on the mental health of older adults. And while the studies thus far show that there have been indeed negative impacts on everyone, and that older adults are experiencing greater depression and loneliness than they had prior to the pandemic, just like everyone else, the most recently published research has been showing consistently that actually proportionally older adults have been less negatively impacted as a group in terms of mental health than younger adults, and that they've been better able to maintain emotional well-being. So you can see on the graph on the chart here, on your screen here, that the lowest share of adults on the very right reporting symptoms of anxiety and depression is in the 65 and older group, which I've bracketed. As one study's authors put it, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to an outbreak of ageism, in which public discourse has portrayed older adults as, again, a homogenous, vulnerable group, when clearly that is not the case, at least when it comes to mental health. So although we do still need further research to clarify which groups and subgroups need increased support on a population level, the data suggests that many older adults are likely more resilient than younger adults to the mental health pandemic, if you will, that is happening. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, however, despite greater resilience in terms of mental health on a population level, it seems as if there has been an increase in elder abuse during the pandemic. A survey in the USA of 897 older people sheltering at home during the pandemic found that the prevalence of elder abuse was approximately 1 out of 5, an 83.6% increase compared to the prevalence estimates before the pandemic, which is what you see in the leftmost set of bars on this table from the study. And now here in Orange County, there was actually a slight decrease in APS reports in 2020 by just about 2.6%, followed by a rebound in 2021 back up to and slightly exceeding 2019's numbers. And it's difficult to say whether this means that our Orange County population was more protected than other communities, as the studies about abuse during the pandemic have shown mixed data for other populations as well, and need further clarification in terms of subgroups and greater likelihood of abuse in different subgroups. So we'll need more time and data to figure that out. But I also know we have some experts in the audience today, I'm sure. So please let us all know during a Q&A if you have any clarifications on this data. And across the studies I reviewed, financial strain due to the pandemic was a risk factor for elder abuse, child abuse, or intimate partner violence. And one of the most protective factors for elder abuse was a greater sense of community. And I just want to point out that both of these factors, the financial burdens of the pandemic and a sense of community or social connectedness, are factors that can be and are most equitably impacted on a societal level. Next slide, please. So now that we've defined elder abuse and made the case that it is a public health and human rights issue, put it into context with other forms of violence in our community, as well as in the context of COVID-19, I'd like to discuss both individual and societal factors that can build resilience as a protective, preventive, and adaptive strategy. So resilience refers to the ability to overcome adversity, recover, and become stronger in the face of difficult experiences and setbacks or trauma. It also refers to cognitive and behavioral sets of coping skills that promote adaptation. So resilience is at once a trait and a state, a noun and a verb, if you will, and a multidimensional construct. Research has also shown that resilience, while exhibited at varying levels across individuals, is something that can be taught and learned at both the individual and community level. Studies have also shown that the majority of us are resilient after traumatic events. A review of 67 studies of people who experienced all kinds of traumatic events ranging from mass shootings, hurricanes, or spinal cord injuries found that 2/3 are found to be resilient and were able to function very well in a short period of time. Next slide. So resilience is complex, as is this diagram, so I'll try to break it down. It's related to many individual characteristics such as temperament, intelligence, cognitive abilities, social factors like the quality of interpersonal relationships during childhood, and environmental factors. However, I want to look at the 6 psychosocial factors that have been most consistently associated with resilience in the literature that are modifiable. So meaning that they are amenable to intervention at any age. And these domains are realistic optimism, maintaining a supportive social network, embracing a personal moral compass that provides a sense of meaning and vision, active coping skills, cognitive flexibility, and attending to one's physical well-being. So starting on the bottom left and going clockwise, optimism refers to the maintenance of positive expectancies for future outcome. We can all seek to maintain a positive, realistic outlook, not dwelling on negative information and striving to find the positive within the negative. Another important factor for promoting resilience is establishing and nurturing a social support network. It's never too late to foster connectedness with the friends and family we have or to create new connections. And the component of resiliency of having a personal moral compass involves developing and holding a set of core beliefs that are positive about oneself and one's role in the world. Altruism is an important behavioral component of developing and embracing a personal moral compass and has been strongly associated with resilience in children and adults. For many, faith in conjunction with religion or spirituality is also an important existential component of a personal moral compass. So we can all pursue altruistic activities like volunteering or simply finding ways to help those around us, or explore faith or spiritual beliefs which speak to our core values. Active coping skills as a factor of promoting resilience incorporates cognitive and behavioral components. So as an example of a cognitive coping skill, we can be mindful of our thoughts when faced with stress or trauma and actively minimize the appraisal of threat while not denying it to manage our level of stress and fear. A behavioral strategy might be to actively seek the help and support of others or to practice relaxation techniques. Cognitive flexibility refers to the ability to reappraise one's perception and experience of a traumatic situation instead of being rigid in one's perception. It means being able to accommodate holding optimism or trying to find meaning and positive outcomes, as well as acknowledging the negative and painful consequences. It also means adapting when we hear new information, as we did, for example, during the course of the pandemic, is our understanding of the virus and how the spread evolved, like recognizing that it's airborne and improving the quality of our masks, for example. And finally, physical activity. Attending to our physical well-being before, during, and after facing stress or trauma can promote resilience. Along with the positive effects on mood and self-esteem that physical exercise confers, being mindful and more confident of one's physical hardiness when faced with a traumatic situation can contribute to mental fortitude to endure and survive. I don't think I need to convince anyone that physical exercise can be a good thing, but it's something that we can control and implement at nearly all levels of mobility. A positive view of one's health in particular may be a protective factor against elder abuse. Now, as we saw in the video at the beginning of my presentation, it is much easier to build social networks if there's reliable public transportation and safe gathering places in the community. It is much easier to have good nutrition that contributes to a sense of physical well-being if you have access to affordable fresh fruits and vegetables, as opposed to living in a food desert. So again, I'd like to have us all utilize our cognitive flexibility to remember that as we're speaking both about the factors that we can control as individuals, while also keeping in mind that we must intervene as a society if we want to improve everyone's resilience. Next slide, please. So there are obvious benefits to encouraging resilience for everyone, but I want to highlight further specific benefits for older adults. Having components of resiliency has been correlated with high functioning and slower aging in older adults. For instance, one group found that nonagenarians aged 94 to 98 with increased resilience had a 43% higher likelihood of living to be 100 than those with lower resilience. Resilient individuals older than 85 are more likely to have intact cognitive status, high mobility, and good nutritional status. Resilience is also associated with greater recovery from exhaustion in older adults and with greater physical and psychological well-being in the face of persistent exhaustion. They've also found that resilience may contribute to a more positive dementia experience for individuals with neurocognitive disorders. And resilience is correlated with greater likelihood of successful aging, which can be defined objectively by a set of measures which include self-assessments of freedom from chronic disease and disability, physical and cognitive functioning, social engagement, psychological functioning, and overall health from a holistic perspective. And resilient individuals are more likely to rate themselves as successfully aging. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to shift to talking about and defining ageism, which plays a significant role in increasing the risk of elder abuse and working against our goals of a more just society for all. Ageism refers to discrimination, prejudice, and stereotyping based on age. Age-based discrimination in employment, housing, and healthcare can and does negatively affect older adults' health and well-being. And unlike other prejudices where there can be in-group favoritism, members of all age groups are prejudiced toward older adults. Ageism is rampant in our society, yet is infrequently recognized as a problem. Every second person in the world is believed to hold ageist attitudes, leading to poor physical and mental health and reduced quality of life for older persons, and costing societies billions of dollars each year, according to a UN report on ageism in 2020. And yet, for example, only 8% of companies include ageism in their DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives as one example of how under-recognized this issue is. Hashtag Disrupt Aging is an initiative by AARP to reject the stereotypes associated with aging in media, and I've used several Getty images from their campaign in my presentation thus far. Next slide, please. Now, turning back to the poll that we took at the beginning of the presentation, let's review some of the answers. So Mike, if you could pull up the results. Okay, so it looks like for number one, it looks like 94% said either sometimes or often that you see, hear, or read jokes about old age, aging, or older people. Number two, it looks like, let's see, 87% have reported hearing, seeing, or reading things, suggesting that older adults and aging are unattractive or undesirable. On question number three, it looks like 59% agree or strongly agree that feeling lonely is part of getting older. And number four, it looks like 54% agree or strongly agree that feeling depressed, sad, or worried is part of getting older. Okay, thank you. We could do the next slide. And I'm sorry, you can, if you're looking at the pop-up window, you can maximize the window or scroll down to see the results. I think it's a little too late. I'll go back over those results. So the questions were part of the University of Michigan National Poll on Healthy Aging, which was conducted in December of 2019, which was before the pandemic was widely impactful, of course, and examined older adults' experiences with 9 forms of everyday ageism. These forms of ageism were categorized into 3 groups. Number 1 was exposure to ageist messages. Number 2 was ageism in interpersonal interactions. And number 3 was about internalized ageism, or personally held beliefs about aging and older people. So overall, 82% of older adults reported regularly experiencing at least one form of everyday ageism in their day-to-day lives. 2 in 3 older adults, 60 or 65%, reported exposure to ageist messages in their day-to-day lives. Nearly half of older adults reported experiencing ageism in their interpersonal interactions, and specific experiences included other people often or sometimes assuming that because of their age, they have difficulty using cell phones and computers, hearing or seeing, or remembering or understanding. In addition, 36% of adults endorsed at least one form of internalized ageism based on their agreement that feeling lonely or feeling depressed, sad, or worried are a normal part of getting older. And 2 in 5 older adults, 40%, reported often or sometimes experiencing 3 or more out of the 9 forms of ageism, everyday ageism. Next slide, please. Now, I have to throw out a disclaimer that, again, that our audience demographics are not the same as this national poll, but just to compare our results. So in this poll, 61% of adults over 50 years old said they sometimes or often would hear, see, or read jokes about old age, aging or older people, compared to a whopping 94% of our audience. 38% reported hearing, seeing, or reading things suggesting that older adults and aging are unattractive or undesirable, compared to 87% of our audience. And in addition, 29% of adults in the poll endorsed one form of internalized ageism based on their agreement that feeling lonely was a normal part of aging, as compared to 59% of our audience. And 26% felt that feeling depressed, sad, or worried was a normal part of getting older versus approximately 54% of our audience. And so I just want to make it very clear here that these are myths. Feeling lonely and feeling depressed, sad, or worried are not parts of getting older. So next slide, please. The national poll also went on to assess the harms of ageism. Older adults who reported experiencing 3 or more forms of everyday ageism in their day-to-day lives had worse physical and mental health than those who reported fewer forms of ageism. For example, older adults who reported 3 or more forms of ageism were less likely to rate their overall physical health as excellent or very good compared to those reporting fewer forms. And older adults who experienced more forms of ageism were also more likely to have a chronic health condition, such as diabetes or heart disease than those reporting fewer forms. Those who regularly experienced 3 or more forms of ageism were less likely to rate their mental health as excellent or very good, and more likely to report symptoms of depression. Also, ageism is an added burden for people living with other forms of prejudice. In 2020, the American Geriatric Society announced a new initiative addressing the intersection of structural racism and ageism in healthcare. Many communities experience discrimination due to their gender, race, sexuality, or disability. As these communities age, they are likely to experience cumulative or intersectional disadvantage due to multiple stigmatized group memberships. The research is clear that there are negative health and psychological consequences associated with each form of discrimination, but the research is less than conclusive regarding the consequences of intersectional discrimination. However, one can anticipate that the consequences might be worse due to what we know about the phenomenon of weathering, which is the early health deterioration as a consequence of the cumulative impact of repeated experiences with social or economic adversity and political marginalization that Black Americans face. Next slide, please. So what are some of the strategies we can employ on an individual level to overcome ageism? First, we can seek out more positive images of aging. The University of Michigan study participants who spent the most time surfing the web and watching TV reported the highest level of exposure to ageist stereotypes. So we can be intentional about our media diets in this regard, particularly when it comes to social media. Secondly, we can encourage and seek out intergenerational contact. Just as is true with other forms of prejudice, interaction between groups helps to break down stereotypes. Dr. Carl Pillemer, a Cornell University sociologist and gerontologist, said, if we teach people more about aging, if they're less frightened of it, less negative about it, and less uncomfortable interacting with older people, that helps. If we get them into contact with older people where they're getting to know each other, that also helps. And if you put those 2 things together, we found that works best of all. So we can teach and educate our society about aging to dispel stereotypes and also to encourage empathy using interventions like visualization. Ageism has been called prejudice against our future self. Using technologies and education, experts are helping younger people envision their older years as an example of one intervention to combat ageism. This motivates them to plan for their future and in the process understand and empathize with older adults. And it could also provide optimism about the future, to provide education about the many benefits of aging and the many contributions of older adults in families, communities, and the media. Another strategy is to speak up. If you see something, say something. So more people are challenging each other to consider their implicit biases, but I would advocate for first becoming more aware of our own implicit bias and ageism. We can all be mindful of how we perpetuate bias and stereotypes about older adults and speak out against it when we see it. Next slide, please. Now, speaking on a societal community level, there are many areas in which we can work to reduce or eliminate ageism, but as I'm running very short on time, I'll highlight just a few. So policies and laws can address discrimination and inequality on the basis of age and protect the human rights of everyone in the workplace. Ageism is also unfortunately rampant in healthcare. Healthcare rationing based solely on age is widespread. Older persons are overwhelmingly excluded from clinical studies that sometimes limit the age of the participant to 65 to 75 years old, despite being more likely to be the end users of medicines and treatment. There's obviously an education gap for healthcare providers and healthcare policymakers about ageism that can be addressed. And finally, in terms of emergency policies, Claudia Mahler, an independent expert who submitted a report to the UN Human Rights Council about older person human rights, noted that the inclusion of older persons in preparedness and planning policies for emergency situations, including in relation to climate change, is critical. Next slide, please. So you may have heard or seen the Swiss cheese model of prevention before. The one on the top left was adapted by Dr. Ian McKay, an Australian virologist, to describe the personal and shared societal responsibilities that can be used to defend against a respiratory virus like the coronavirus. And the bottom right is a model adapted by Dr. Caitlin Jadalina, an epidemiologist who studies violence to reduce firearm deaths in the US. Now, with all of these models, the key is that each intervention has imperfections or holes, but multiple layers improve success. There are things we can do as individuals, but also things we can do as a society to help tackle a public health crisis. And we can think about elder abuse and ageism in the same way. Next slide, please. So going back to the social structure model introduced in the video, to create a strong and just society for all, where everyone from children to older adults can be free from abuse and discrimination, we need strong beams which need to be enforced, which I think are similar to the layers from the Swiss cheese model that I just mentioned. And I listed just some of the elements we've discussed today on the right that I think, for what I think those beams might be. Supporting resilience of individuals and families, for example, prevention, increasing awareness around the issue of ageism as we're doing today, civic design and investment like public transportation, promoting access to healthcare for all, providing resources for our caregivers, making sure that APS and other enforcement authorities have the resources to intervene when necessary. Next slide, please. Now I wanted to conclude on a hopeful note by reviewing one intervention to combat ageism, which is to educate about not just the benefits of aging, but also a realistic picture of the positive experience of most older adults in terms of their perspective on aging. So going back to the University of Michigan poll about ageism, while clearly they found that ageism has these negative impacts on individuals and society, which often compounds disparities, the poll also reflected the resilience of older adults, in that 88% of poll respondents agreed that they feel more comfortable being themselves as they've gotten older. And 80% said that they have a strong sense of purpose. About 2 in 3 adults have agreed that as they've gotten older, their feelings about aging have gotten more positive, 67% here. And 65% say that their life is better than they thought it would be. So clearly the majority of older adults hold positive perspectives about aging, which is not something that I think is understood by the greater public, but they should. And now hopefully you all do too. Next slide. And the last thing I'd like to share with you all today is to tell you about something called the U-shaped happiness age curve, which is supported by a large base of empirical literature and has been found in developing and high-income countries throughout the world. And I just saw a study the other night that shows that it may be in primates as well. But it's not something that I was aware of until very recently. So this graph on the screen is from the US, but the curves appear the same throughout the world, where various measures of well-being decline in adulthood, with the lowest point in midlife, around 40 to 50 years old, but starts to increase in older age. Studies of successful aging, the concept that I mentioned earlier, have also found that older age was associated with higher subjective ratings of well-being, despite worse physical and cognitive functioning. This is to say, most older adults still consider themselves to be successfully aging, even if they are not in perfect physical health or have lost some cognitive abilities. So I think it's important for all of us to challenge societal ageism and ableism, given the objective evidence of older adult resilience, and to have optimism ourselves as we approach the care of older adults and look at the individual and collective ways to address the societal problem of elder abuse. All right, next slide. Thank you for your kind attention. My apologies, many apologies for the technical difficulties. My references are available upon request, and now we will turn to some Q&A with whatever time we have remaining.
Thank you, Dr. Park. Hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Rubio, and this is a friendly reminder to submit your questions for our presenters in the Q&A box. Okay, Dr. Park, we have a few questions. The first one is there a survey that older adults can take to view their ageism beliefs?
Not that I know of, but I'm happy to, in my references for this presentation, or if you just Google the National Poll on Aging, you can see the various different questions that were asked, the 9 different questions that explore the three different forms of ageism. And that might be a good way to have a check to see whether you hold these whether you have been exposed to these forms of ageism, as well as if you hold these ageist perspectives. But that's a great question. I don't know of a specific resource to explore one's own internalized ageism, but I'll get back to you.
Thank you. And we have another question. Are there any overall studies that show the advantages to living at home versus living in assisted living facilities?
That is also a really great question. From what I have seen, so for example, just as an example, when looking at, which of course is a difficult study in terms of figuring out the prevalence of elder abuse and reporting whatnot, the 1 in 10 statistic was based on older adults living in the community or at home. I could not find any reliable estimates. And I think the consensus was that it's very difficult to do for older adults living in any sort of care facilities or long-term facilities. And so as far as I know, and I know that's not specifically addressing the question in terms of the advantages or pros and cons in terms of living at home versus in a facility. So I don't know of any data that supports it. I think ultimately, of course, it comes down to the individual, their family, their community, what resources are available, and oftentimes it's an incredibly difficult choice. And so it may be a matter of just picking what is going to encourage the resilience of an individual in the best way.
Thank you, Dr. Park. All righty, we don't have any more questions. So thank you again for the wonderful presentation and for answering the questions. I will now turn it over to Libby, who will introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And once again, we're very fortunate to have a well-known expert in the legal field with us today. Dan is a licensed California attorney. He has practiced law for almost 35 years and is the longtime chair of the North Orange County Senior Collaborative, which is a service group committed to identifying and addressing the unmet needs of seniors and their support systems in the North County area. His work includes professional assistance to senior groups, as well as persons with developmental and physical disabilities. Dan holds a bachelor's degree in history from the University of California at Berkeley and a Juris Doctor from Western State University College of Law. He's a frequent guest lecturer on long-term care, incapacity, and estate planning. Welcome to Dan.
Thank you, Libby. It is an honor to be here today, to be able to present the information I've prepared on a topic that is dear to my heart. I want to start by thanking the entire committee and Kelly for a wonderful program and a tremendous amount of planning. 7 months have gone into this, as they said earlier. I want you to help me to retitle my program today. I didn't know I was going to ask you to do this, but I want you to think about planning in the context of elder abuse a little bit differently. So the first thing I would do if I was retitling this is I would strike out the words financial resilience, and I would title my talk today, Common Sense Planning as a Defense to Elder Abuse. The word best, you can decide after today, when I tell you the consequences of not planning, whether this would be a good idea. Next slide, please. The best way to get started with resilience in this context is to understand that resilience is not the absence of challenges in your life. You may be thinking about a number of situations you encountered throughout your life and say to yourself, I'm not resilient at all. Look how often I've struggled to get back up. Resilience is not the absence of distress or difficulty. Resilience is the ability to adapt and grow following adversity. Next slide, please. I wanted to introduce the concept of how dementia affects our ability to resist abuse. I'm going to read some of our statistics on screen. Approximately 5.1 million Americans over 65 have some kind of dementia. Approximately 50% of all people over 85 have Alzheimer's disease or dementia. And close to 50% of the people with dementia, according to studies, experience some kind of abuse. Of course, Dr. Park shared with us earlier that abuse comes in various forms, so keep that in mind. 47% of participants in a 2010 study on dementia and abuse were found to be mistreated by caregivers. The important thing to note here is that proper planning promotes resilience. Elder abuse can include fraud and undue influence. And the last statistic on your screen about mistreatment by caregivers highlights the fact that very oftentimes abuse comes from the people that we know. That's an unpleasant fact, but it does occur. Next slide, please. You are more vulnerable to exploitation and fraud when you don't plan ahead. It's harder for the people that care about you to protect your resources when you don't have the legal documents in place to express your true wishes. If you finish your legal documents before a serious illness, such as advanced dementia, your plans provide a better defense. A well-known and long-standing plan in writing will establish a record of your true priorities, your preferences and desires in living arrangements, in medical care, and in how your finances are used. Next slide, please. As you are thinking about setting up a plan, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts and the pieces of your plan a bit later, it's very important to determine who you trust so that your family and your circle of support can become better allies. Dr. Park spoke earlier and showed a slide that indicated among the strategies that help to reduce elder abuse are building a trust network so that you can remain calm and in control even when those adversities come. I speak to a number of organizations that deal with the challenge of dementia, Alzheimer's, and various other diseases that gradually reduce a person's ability to manage their affairs. And it's the reason that I so often say that the sooner any person starts, the easier it is for you, the individual, to understand and make choices in your planning. It's very important to understand that when you come to an attorney like me, it sometimes can take time for me to understand your values, for you to understand the numerous choices that you have to make. And what happens is it becomes a conversation between the individual, that is the client, and the attorney. So you want to allow plenty of time for that process to play out. It disappoints me very oftentimes when people come in a crisis, although we deal with those as well, where not enough time is allowed for the person to really understand these choices. And if you wait too long, you become legally incapacitated. What that means is because of your physical or your mental condition, you are legally incapable of understanding or communicating your choices. Very often, I have people ask me, when does incapacity occur? And that's one of the reasons we ask that people come in as soon as possible. Incapacity is a very vague term. It depends a lot on the types of medication you're taking, whether you are fatigued, whether you're having a good day or a bad day. And because of the uncertainty involved with it, it's always better to stay as far away from that condition as possible. Next slide, please. If you don't have a clear legal plan in place before you become incapacitated, you lose control, okay? One of the things I want to also bring home to the audience today is that our social services agencies, our courts, and our enforcement agencies are not well designed and set up to do your planning for you, okay? When abuse occurs and where there's good evidence of it, they may take enforcement actions, or there may be civil lawsuits, but all of those things tend to become very protracted, very expensive, and their outcomes are quite uncertain. Planning is always preferred. These agencies are not designed to do your planning for you. However, if you do wait too late, there's a court proceeding. In some states, it's called guardianship. In our state, for those persons over 18 years of age, it's called conservatorship. And what it means is that a court may appoint someone you don't even know to oversee your care and finances if the court determines that you have lost capacity. When you lose control, you tend to open the door to dishonest or greedy persons who may attempt to gain control or influence your decisions. Next slide, please. Failing to make a legal plan in writing also increases stress and expense for the persons that care most about you. And one of the bullet points I saw on Dr. Park's slide regarding strategies for dealing with abuse is calm and in control. That's what we're striving for. It is possible with a good plan for you to be calm and in control because you have anticipated and planned for many of the things that can occur. Also, a good plan reduces guesswork and brings peace, tends to bring peace in your family. It's always important to make sure that it is up to date. We very often encounter situations where people believe that once they have made a plan, perhaps as long as 20 or 30 years ago, they believe that that set of papers will always reflect their choices and will always be the best plan for their financial and their personal care. In most cases, that just simply is not true. The fact is that our families change. The people that we depend on in our lives may change. They may pass away. They may move away. And so it is very important to make sure these plans are up to date. Next slide, please. Okay, we have a poll, and we'll get that up on screen. I want to get a sense from you about what your experience is, and what is on your mind? That's really what I'm trying to determine here, because I want this presentation to also address your concerns. So if you would go ahead and pick one of the choices there you see on the screen so we can tally the poll.
All right, looks like people are still answering. Okay, we'll give it a few more minutes. Okay, it looks like everyone has answered. I will end the poll and I will share the results.
Okay, so the question was, how often do you worry that choices you make about living arrangements or finances or medical care will not be followed? The majority of you said that you occasionally worry about that. In fact, 66% of you said that, with 130 people responding. 25% said never, and 10% said very often. So that could be an indicator of a lot of things. It could be that you are very familiar with your choices and that they've been properly put into an estate plan for those that never worry about it. Or perhaps you're depending on someone else to make the choices for you. In any event, there's a significant number of you that occasionally worry that your choices may not be honored. Next screen, please. Okay. Before we get started with the 8 steps to successful estate planning, I want to address several things, some misconceptions, and also to give you some reassurance. When we reach the end of my presentation today, we are going to be sharing with you resources for every budget, There is sometimes the belief that you don't have an estate. An estate is only something that a person named Rockefeller would have, or someone with great wealth. The fact is that everything that you own that is tangible, your money, your property, everything that you have is your estate. And so when we use that term, it is a legal term, but you should think of it as essentially planning for everything that you have saved, you and your spouse perhaps, and that you have managed to grow through your various savings and investments and so forth. So it is a very important step. When you do the kind of planning that we're going to be talking about, it reduces the questions in your family. I wish I had a nickel for every time I've heard a family bring up questions like, what if this and what if that? We are trying to anticipate the what ifs so that you, the client, know what will happen in a variety of situations. These plans are normally drawn to reflect alternate outcomes. It's important to understand. I'm very often asked how often people should update their plan. And my response is, if anyone becomes seriously ill, if there is a death in the family, a birth, a key person moves away, if there is a sale or a purchase or other acquisition of valuable property or an account, if you change the people you wish to receive after your passing, if you begin to suffer issues of memory, decline in cognition, that is the ability to understand or to communicate, and anytime you have a question that you can't seem to answer when you review your estate plan, you should turn to someone that can help you with it. Okay. let's start with the first step in the 8 steps to successful planning, organizing your financial information. Very often with my older adult clients, there is a legacy of privacy. People have learned through their childhood, as I was taught, that financial information is just something we don't discuss that much. Every person has a right of privacy. However, I would say that if you have chosen someone that you trust to assist you with it, you do want to begin to familiarize them with your situation so that they will understand your resources and know how to assist you in getting the planning done. If you see an estate planning attorney, and particularly an elder law attorney, you will probably notice that they will very much be concerned about making sure the decisions that are made are those of the older adult, the elder client. And it's always important to know that here in California and in most states, everyone over the age of 18 is presumed to have the capacity, the ability to make their own decisions about where they live, their medical treatment, and how they are to spend their money. So it's always important to assist where you can, but also to understand that we presume this unless that is proven otherwise. The second item, of course, is very important, and we've touched on it. Choosing successors and alternates to manage what you have and your medical care is very important, because there will come a day for most of us when we can no longer do so. I think it's really important to think of this question of incapacity. I'm going to double back to that for just a minute, as not something that proceeds uniformly on a timeline. I think too often in dealing with the older adult community, we think, oh, well, we just go through these various stages of gradual decline, and then ultimately a person loses capacity. 3 days ago, my 19-year-old daughter and I sat down and we began preparing her estate plan. That may surprise some of you. And here's why it's important to know that. It speaks to incapacity. She's going on a long trip and she will be halfway across the country. In fact, she's there by now. And it was very important to my wife and I that everyone should know, in the event that she lost consciousness or was involved in some unfortunate accident, that she had chosen medical agents and how to reach those people and what her wishes were about treatment. So when I speak of capacity, the point is that any one of us have probably lost capacity already at least once in our lives. You may have gone into surgery. You may have been under some kind of medication that impaired your ability to make decisions and to control how you want to be treated and how your finances are used. So let's start thinking about this as something that could happen to any one of us. The third and very important step in successful estate planning is to start a conversation with that chosen manager. Now, you'll notice I've used the word manager. I haven't used the technical terms yet, but I'm going to right now, okay? If you have a trust, your manager is your successor trustee. If you have a will, which only becomes effective at your death, you have an executor. If you have a power of attorney, you have an agent or a successor agent. These are all just people that manage for you. That's one of the reasons I prefer to use the word manager when we speak informally about this. So why would it be important to start a conversation with these people? First of all, the events that I described earlier can happen anytime and without warning. And it's very important that these people know what your papers mean, where to find these papers, and how to step in when their help is needed. The fourth step has to do with finding qualified help to prepare legal documents. There is a tendency, I find, among people to try and save money, save a little bit of money at this stage when you're trying to find qualified help. So here's what I would say to you. If you have worked hard during your life to save and invest, acquire a home perhaps, and maybe even a business, then the care and planning for those very important things, essentially everything you've owned, everything you've planned for, as well as your health care, deserves good professional attention. If you rely solely on a form, you may be only planning for one of many, many possible outcomes. And you may not realize that the choices in that form may not cover all of the issues that may arise in your life. So very important to select someone who is qualified. And at the end in our resources section, I'm going to touch on how to find someone like that. Again, for every budget, for every budget. Next slide. You'll want to make sure that the documents are signed, witnessed, and notarized. This is a tricky business when you're trying to do things yourself. Very oftentimes I find that people have had people witness their documents who are not qualified witnesses. I'll give you a quick example. Here in the state of California, we have what is called an advanced healthcare directive. If you use two witnesses to verify your document rather than a notary, those witnesses have to be qualified. That means they cannot be employee of a nursing home. They cannot be your doctor or an employee of your doctor. And there are a number of other disqualifications. So it's very important to make sure that you follow the signing and notarization plan, which your attorney can help you with. Item 6 is very important because very often we find that people write paper and they never bother to implement the written plan. There is a second step after things are signed and notarized and the plan is laid out. So the best way to think of this is that your plan is a blueprint. You haven't built the house yet. You've only finished the blueprint, okay? This is where your attorney's instructions about placing appropriate assets into your trust or designating your beneficiaries on your retirement plans, and also making sure that your life insurance designations are up to date. People are very often surprised that maybe the person they designated 20, 30 years ago on life insurance or a retirement plan it has passed away and there is no contingent or secondary person name. So this requires very careful attention and coordination to make sure that the plan works as a whole. We've already talked about reviewing your plan documents with your attorney to keep them up to date. I cannot overemphasize that. So very important. I always encourage people to make sure that whoever you choose is someone that you feel a certain chemistry with, that you can bond with them and know that they are willing and able to follow up with you and answer your questions. Item 8 is especially important for those who have serious questions about their health. If you have a chronic or progressive condition and you're not sure when the time will be right to turn over responsibilities to your successor managers, it is very important to have that conversation with your successor and also with your chosen attorney. As recently as yesterday, I had that conversation with a client. It's very important to remember too, that when a person gets a diagnosis of, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, that is not a definition of incapacity. In the early stages of any dementia, the individual may have the ability to still understand and make choices, particularly if they're well explained and maybe in a simplified form. Again, the reason to start early. But there does come a point when you should decide when it's time to begin shifting responsibilities to your successor managers. And that's where you'll want to have that conversation with the successor and the attorney, keeping in mind that everything that you own in a trust remains your property. Your managers are what are called fiduciaries. They are people that hold a very, very high level of responsibility to you and your wishes, and they cannot do things in an arbitrary way. They must follow your plan. Next slide, please. So good planning brings a sense of calm when the storms come. I like to think of this issue of resiliency a little bit like the famous case of the Titanic. All right. The Titanic, by all apparent evidence, was a powerful ship. It seemed that everything was ready, except that you have to realize that there were certain aspects of its design and construction and equipping that meant it was not a very resilient ship. It didn't have adequate lifeboats. The metal plating was not properly fastened. It was not in a position to be able to endure a collision of the kind that it encountered. And it really had no advanced warning system the way we do now. So when you have good planning, when you are equipped, it gives you a feeling of control. It also prompts you to think long range about how you want your life to be. It always disappoints me a little when people approach estate planning as getting ready for death and only death. The fact of the matter is, as we've seen from statistics earlier in the program, chances are you're going to live statistically much longer than people who lived a century ago. So there's a lot of living to think about. And thinking about how you want your life to be in the future is a great exercise. Also, good planning promotes problem solving because it brings into focus issues that you may be avoiding. There may be conflicts in the family that you want to try and resolve. You may want to make provision for people that you do think of occasionally, but you just haven't put down in writing. So in other words, don't worry, prepare. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to talk for a few minutes about the kinds of documents that should be in place. Again, let's think of this as our blueprint. You're setting up a blueprint. And we're going to be talking about three basic categories. A will or trust, and that is going to determine how your assets are used. A power of attorney. Powers of attorney are used while you are alive, not after you pass away. And they are used to manage your property, your assets, and even to help with decisions and arrangements for your personal care. And then finally, the Advanced Healthcare Directive. If you're viewing this in another state, you may hear a different term for the Advanced Healthcare Directive. You may hear something like Power of Attorney for Healthcare. Essentially, it's the same type of document. Next slide, please. Okay. Let's talk about a will for just a few minutes. So a will distributes your assets after you pass away. A will is of no use or utility while you're still alive. Your executor is only empowered at the moment of your death. There is a major difference between a will-centered plan and a trust-centered plan. And I want to mention that very early here. I speak as a California attorney. So some of these basic principles apply in other states, but it's very important to hear the details here. If you only have a will and your state is worth more than $184,500 and the person died on or after April 1 of this year, if it's worth more than $184,500, then your estate will have to be handled through the courts through a process called probate. Okay. Let's move on to what a trust is. A trust handles your assets and makes sure that your resources are administered for your benefit while you're still alive, and also that they are distributed to the people you chose when you pass away. Did you hear that? Okay. So a trust essentially is a substitute for a will. In most cases, it can act as a substitute for a will. That is a great thing. It very much simplifies administering and caring for your estate, and also making sure that your wishes are carried out. Also, by the way, it is not going to, in most cases, not going to be administered through the courts. That will save a lot of time and money. Here in California, and where I'm sitting today in Orange County, I would say that an average probate in my county is taking around 2 years. I just finished working on a probate that took 6.5 years. And during that period of time, the assets are generally not fully distributed. Also, the legal costs are much greater in most cases, and there are fees that you don't encounter if you have a trust. Also, a trust is a private document, and a will gets filed at the local court and is open to review by anybody in the world, along with the things that you leave after you pass away. They will know about your debts, about your assets, and so forth. Next slide, please. I get a lot of questions about the power of attorney. Very often, probably several times a week, I receive a panicked call or a very urgent call from an adult child to a senior, asking how they can get a power of attorney for their mom or dad who has been admitted to a nursing home or to a hospital and may be in very difficult condition. In many cases, that person may not be conscious all the time. They may be under medication. So it's very important to hear what I'm about to say. A valid power of attorney can only be signed by the person giving the power. And their signature is only valid if they sign while they have the ability to understand what they are signing. So if one waits too long and is asking for a power to get a power of attorney for someone else, you cannot get a power of attorney for someone else. That person has to understand what they're signing and do so with capacity. What does it do? Well, first of all, you should know that it is only effective in most cases while the giver of the power is still alive. Okay? Again, this is where the trust can be very powerful and very helpful, as I described previously. So a power of attorney gives power to another person to make decisions, financial decisions, not medical decisions, financial decisions on your behalf. It gives that trusted person the power to help you manage your financial decisions if you become unable to do so. There's also a common misperception that if you sign a power of attorney, well, you no longer have power over anything you own. Not true. A power of attorney only adds another person to the decision making, as long as you still have the ability to make decisions. If you have capacity and you simply want that person to help you go to the bank or deal with financial institutions, it can be a very, very useful document. However, if you're looking at your slide right now, I want you to focus on the words trusted person. It's very important that this person not try and abuse the use of this power of attorney by mingling what they own with what you own, or spending money for things that do not pertain to you or without your consent. Unfortunately, some people never get around to doing any of the documents I just described. They don't do, in particular, during life, they don't do a power of attorney and they don't do a trust. And if you don't do this kind of planning, and if you lose capacity, that is the ability to set up a plan, you may need a conservatorship in the courts. Conservatorship is long, it's costly, and it's a public court process here in California. I do speak with colleagues in other states, and I can tell you that California probably has one of the more complicated conservatorship systems in the country. So you need to know that, because when your decision-making passes to the courts to determine, it can strip you of your autonomy. That is your ability to make your own personal decisions. When your power of attorney takes effect is entirely up to you. I have many clients that have a trusted agent, maybe a son or a daughter or a nephew or a niece, and they feel comfortable in giving that power right now. However, it is possible to set up a power of attorney to be triggered by a future event, such as a physician determination of your incapacity. There is a lot of different thinking on this. I tend to favor an immediate power when you are very sure that the person you've chosen is trusted. It can be very difficult and somewhat time-consuming that to get physicians to certify incapacity. For one thing, most physicians will need to see a current, will need to make a current examination and review of your records, and to have a visit with you if your capacity is in doubt. And many powers of attorney require 2 or more physicians to make that determination. My bottom line is that when control is needed, this delay can be very disruptive to your care and even to managing your finances. Next slide, please. Okay, I promised you, we're going to talk about the Advanced Care Directive. I already gave you the example of my daughter starting her planning, and her Advanced Health Care Directive is very important. What it does is to give power to another person to make medical decisions on your behalf. I'm going to skip forward just a moment to the when part. A lot of people want to know, well, when does this power take effect? In most cases, the Advanced Healthcare Directive only gives that person the power to make medical decisions in your place if the treating physician determines that the patient no longer has the ability to reliably communicate and understand their choices. So I try and put my clients at ease, because the decision of your capacity in that case is not being made by a court. It's not being made by your attorney. It's being made by the treating doctor. And it gives a trusted person the power to help you manage your medical decisions if you become unable to do so, even temporarily. There are lots of us that may go in for surgery at one time or another in our lives, and it's very important to have this in place. And I'll say it again, in my view, everyone in the state of California over the age of 18 ought to have an Advanced Healthcare Directive. The kinds of decisions that it covers includes decisions of whether to start, to stop, or to change doctors, medications, tests, treatments, CPR, dialysis, feeding tube. It also includes a number of other end-of-life types of decisions. It can designate a spiritual advisor. whether you would prefer to pass away at home or in a facility like a hospital, and what happens to your remains after you pass away. I have to throw in a little funny story here. One of the committee organizers, Carol, and I attended a presentation on advanced healthcare directives, and one of the participants shared that her mother had used the advanced healthcare directive to state that when she passed away, her remains were never to be transported by airplane. She had a fear of airplanes during her life, and she carried that over after her death. So, true to their word, her remains were transported, I believe it was by train or by bus, to the family cemetery where they were eventually interred. My bottom line is that don't think of this as a form. Think of this as a prompt to help you customize how you want to be treated and how your remains are to be dealt with after you pass. Next slide, please. Okay, I promised resources for every budget. By the way, these resources are going to be distributed after our talk. I believe that they're going to talk about that a bit later. But what you see on screen are free legal and financial planning workshops offered by very reliable sources. And I have to emphasize that when you're looking for sources of information, it's so important to know that you can trust them. The Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's Orange County, and Caregiver Resource Center here in Orange County periodically offer financial and legal workshops at no charge. They usually last anywhere for an hour and a half to as much as 2 hours, and sometimes Q&A takes longer. But the point is, we are only able to cover some of this information very quickly. They can offer much greater detail in the workshops. Next slide, please. Oh, and let me say something else about anytime I mention Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's Orange County, or the Caregiver Resource Center. Please don't assume that the legal workshops are only for family members or yourself if you happen to be suffering from dementia. They are not. The information they provide are of general application, and I know that you'll receive a lot of value even if you're much younger and if you don't have any chronic or progressive conditions. People often ask, where do I go to hire a good attorney? The National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys is the largest nationwide association of attorneys with a focus on the issues of elder law, many of the issues we're talking about today, as well as persons with disability of any age. The acronym NAELA stands for National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. They have an excellent website with a directory that is built in so that you can find a list of attorneys near you by putting in your zip code or your town. The California Advocates for Nursing Home Reform, again, I want to emphasize that CANHR, C-A-N-H-R, is an organization whose mission and resources have expanded far beyond nursing home reform. They actually run a state bar registered and approved attorney registry. And you can reach them at the phone number shown on screen as well as their website. And finally, a local favorite of mine here in Orange County is the Public Law Center, partly because they provide no charge legal representation for low-income residents of Orange County. There is a way of qualifying, and you can reach them at their website shown on screen or their phone number. Next screen, please. I want to say a few words about finding forms for the Advanced Healthcare Directive. The Advanced Care Directive is one of the few parts of your estate plan that you can actually start yourself, okay? And I say one of the few because, as I mentioned earlier, there is danger in relying on other forms for powers of attorney, trusts, and wills that are not accompanied with good legal guidance. You can make mistakes that really upend your entire wishes and don't meet your needs. But the Advanced Care Directive is so well explained, so well laid out, and there is so much good guidance on it that I encourage people to search out and at least get started with that decision making. One of my favorites on this screen is the Coalition for Compassionate Care of California, a nonprofit that actually publishes on their website the Advanced Care Directive in multiple languages and in multiple formats. There are formats that explain the concepts in a simplified way. I'll say just a few words about 5 wishes. It is a little bit more elaborate, but very well explained in layman's terms to help you understand what your wishes mean. And thank you for your attention. I will turn this over to, I believe, Amanda.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda. Thank you, Daniel. That was a great presentation. We do have a few questions for you. So the first question is actually a personal question from one of our audience members. They are asking a question for their mother. So their mom is married to somebody who is now in a care facility due to a stroke, and was told falsely that they were entitled to service benefits, so like in the military, and now they're finding out that that was actually false. Is there anything that this person can do for their mother?
Well, I'm going to start by saying in a preliminary way, be very careful, particularly about the sources of information you use for veterans benefits. Every county here in California has a Veterans Service Office that provides reliable information and assistance with applications at no charge. And very often you're going to find counselors at the VA hospitals like the one in Long Beach that offer free counseling on benefits. Avoid sources that may be trying to sell you products of one kind or another. I would mention 2 things. First, see the Veterans Service Office, talk to the Caregiver Resource Center and the Alzheimer's Association and Alzheimer's Orange County about other sources of information about veterans benefits. There are good, reliable sources. Those that actually assist with applications are required to register with the Department of Veterans Affairs as accredited agents. So they're actually not supposed to be helping with applications unless they're approved.
Thank you. And we also provided a link in the chat for that individual as well. The next question is an advanced healthcare directive legitimate if the person assigned to manage your care is your attorney?
Yes. This actually came up recently with a family member. And if the person is not an employee of a nursing home or of your doctor, and is not receiving a benefit through your estate plan, that person could be your attorney. Let me make a little word of caution here. It's very important to understand that the person acting as agent for healthcare, particularly in a medical crisis or in a chronic or progressive condition, may be called on very often and has to be available, sometimes at inconvenient hours and places, to go down, meet with doctors and caregivers, to review situations, to approve care plans. And as an attorney, I have never accepted a client request to act as a medical agent. So I would say, in my experience, that is fairly unusual.
Thank you. All right, next question is it necessary that your estate plan be recorded? I'm guessing written down.
Well, the term recorded as a legal term here in California means more than one thing. If by recorded you mean, does it have to be written down on paper and properly witnessed or notarized? In that sense, it does have to be. If, however, they meant, does it have to be recorded at the county recorder's office as a public document? It does not. And I really want to emphasize that. Particularly a trust-based estate plan or any estate plan remains subject to your amendment or your adjustment or changing, okay? So that's one of the reasons that it would be extremely rare to find an estate plan recorded as a public document. You always want to preserve your right to make those changes as needed.
Thank you. What are the pros and the cons of a will versus a trust? Are both needed, or is one better than the other?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but I'll give you as short an answer as I can. A trust-based plan very often includes what is called a pour-over will. All that means is that if something was not put into the name of your trust and you passed away, your will directs that that item, that account, that piece of property should be ordered by the court into the control of your trust. The major differences are a trust is a private document. A will become very likely a public document if it's administered through the courts. A trust is something that will serve you while you're still alive. It can actually support your care, your preferences regarding government benefits. A will only takes effect at the point of your death. So I have, as you probably could tell, a decided preference, as do most people, for a trust. Most people do not want to end up in the courts. And if your estate exceeds $184,500 at your death, and by the way, that includes your home, okay? That includes your home, then it's likely that your estate will end up in the courts, even if you have a will.
Thank you. All right, we had a few of the same question, but if someone doesn't have a power of attorney, is the next of kin the spouse and then their children? How does that work?
Yeah, let me talk about financial versus medical decision-making. So when you are dealing with financial institutions, your mutual fund, your IRA company, your local bank, they very much depend on written documents. They are going to depend on written documents to authenticate your authority to make decisions, financial decisions for your loved one, the elder who may be ill. So next of kin is not going to necessarily hold a lot of weight with them. The only exception I would say is if you are married and your spouse is a joint owner on an account or a piece of property, they will likely have their wishes honored. When we talk about medical decision-making, I would say there is the formal way of putting it in writing, the way I've suggested with the Advanced Healthcare Directive, is best. Very often, hospitals will honor the decisions of the spouse. The medical foundation for honoring choices for people other than the spouse is kind of shaky. And I have to tell you that whenever hospitals get any indication that there's a conflict between children or other family members, they tend to tell the family that they will have to go to court for a conservatorship to get a court to authorize someone to make those decisions. The best way to stay out of that murky area is to make sure things are properly in writing.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Can you please provide your thoughts on the 5 wishes? Is it considered a legally valid document? And then what else needs to be established in addition to this form?
5 wishes in California, and according to California law, is a valid advanced healthcare directive, provided it's properly signed, witnessed, or notarized. So it meets all the legal requirements, and usually the front of the form will tell you that. I'm licensed in California. I cannot say that it's honored in all states, but here in California, it is. What other documents do you need besides it? The Advanced Healthcare Directive is a foundation document. That means that it is the best way of making sure your wishes are carried out. There are other documents some of you may have heard of called, for example, a DNR or a physician order for life-sustaining treatment. Those are good documents, but they are not the replacement for the Advanced Care Directive, and they are not required. They can provide wonderful guidance for those that are either in a chronic or a serious medical condition about very specific medical treatments. And physicians are the ones that sign those. I don't prepare them. They are to be a product of a conversation between the client and the doctor.
Great, thank you. We have a few of these questions. Is what steps are determined or taken to determine if someone has capacity to sign a power of attorney?
That is a very complicated question. And the best I can do right now is to give you some sense of how the answer is arrived at, okay? There are a lot of factors that go into that in our laws. Among the factors that go into it are the person's orientation to time and place. Do they know where they are? Do they recognize the significant people in their life? Do they know what they own? Are they aware of decisions they've previously made about what becomes of their resources if they become ill or pass away? Are they on any particular medication that could undermine their ability to carry out those functions? So if you begin to glaze over as I describe all this, it's because even in the courts, there's a lot of dispute about when a person crosses the line of incapacity. Typically, what you're going to find is that we try and simplify the determination of incapacity by writing into a trust or a power of attorney a test for when that person is no longer able to make their own decisions. And very often it's with the decision or the certification of one or two doctors, okay? But the legal definition would take far too long to completely describe today. We could probably be here the rest of the day.
And do we know, or is the notary public responsible for determining if someone has the capacity to sign a power of attorney?
No, and that's one of the reasons that I continually urge people to get the professional help that they need in making sure that their entire estate plan is well put together and reflects the choices of the individual. Most elder law attorneys will insist on meeting with the client very early on to determine whether that person can make decisions. And by law and by attorney ethics, they should not offer to prepare documents for anyone who it's very clear is incapacitated or whose capacity is very questioned. They may, in some cases, insist on getting a doctor's written report or making sure that proper and appropriate testing is done.
Thank you. And I know we only have a minute or so left, so we have a few questions. Someone is asking, are retirement accounts taxable to the beneficiary upon death?
That again is a somewhat complex question. I can tell you very quickly that the benefits from an IRA are not counted at the death of the person who leaves, that are not counted as ordinary income, okay? But you should consult your attorney about the other tax consequences of receiving the benefits from an IRA.
All right, and then last question. We hear about living wills. What's the difference? If you could just take a moment, I know we're about to hit time, so.
Sure. The term living will is not used generally in the legal community in California. You will see it in other states. And very simply, it means this. It is a statement about how that individual wants their life support to be handled when they reach the end of their life, and whether they want to choose natural death, what we call natural death, or if they want to be sustained for a period of time under a variety of different conditions. So let me make this easy for everybody. The Advanced Healthcare Directive in California is a very elegantly designed and very comprehensive document. It actually includes a section that you could call a living will. If you complete it properly, you can tell people how, in what conditions you want to be supported near the end of your life and how long you want that process to go on, right? As well as all the other decisions we mentioned earlier. So it will include essentially a living will.
Great. Thank you, Daniel York. It was a great presentation. We've got lots of comments thanking you for this and making it so easy to understand for everybody. So thank you. I'm going to be now handing it off to Maika and Kim for some closing remarks. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. Now I'd like to introduce Kim Nguyen from Orange County Social Services for our closing remarks.
I forgot to mute myself. Thank you, Maika. We would like to thank all of our presenters today for their time and the invaluable information they provided. I also like to personally thank our committees for all of their hard work to make this event possible. And most importantly, we thank all of you for being here today. You will receive a survey by email shortly. We would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also receive a follow-up email with a link to view a recording of today's webinar when it is available. On behalf of our committees and our presenters, thank you again for joining us and have a great rest of your day.